Hey, welcome to Straight Painting. I'm your host, Zach, and on this episode, we're going to take a look at the work of Tom Thomson. Tom Thomson, man, myth, legend. Considered one of the greatest Canadian artists, his painting helped to pioneer a Canadian style and identity. Over a 5-year career, cut short by a mysterious death, he worked with members of the Group of Seven, as well as being mentored by Florence McGillivray, and produced many iconic works of Canadian art. Born in 1877 in Claremont, Ontario, he grew up in Leith outside of Owen Sound. He worked as a graphic designer, which is how he met members of what would become the Group of Seven. He was also a late bloomer, starting his painting career at the age of 34. You can learn more about his life and work at the Art Institute of Canada website, the Group of Seven website, the Tom Thomson catalog, and the Walrus article, What Tom Thomson Saw. I'll leave links in the description box below if you want to learn more. Thomson is a painter who I find hard to pin down stylistically, because of the growth shown in his work. His Impressionist and Fauvist style changes from more traditional portrayals to what became an original style, and I've tried to keep these examples to what seems to me a coherent evolution of his work. In Moonlight, painted in the winter of 1913-1914, we find a scene set on a lake in Algonquin Provincial Park, with a quarter moon standing in for the sun on a clear night. In this piece, we can see clear Impressionist influences. There's something of Monet and Van Gogh about the way he paints the light emanating from the moon and dancing across the water. My mind takes me to Impression Sunrise and Starry Night while looking at this picture. The palette is almost monochromatic, with the black and some hints of blue breaking up a very yellow scene. In contrast, Morning Cloud, painted in the same winter, shows us the soft diffusion of morning light as it starts the day. The monochromatic palette has given way to a softer, washed-out palette of blues, greens, and yellows. Both of these paintings have very similar brushwork, with lots of short, quick strokes breaking up the sections of solid color and giving a very delicate, idyllic feeling to these scenes. They're very calming pictures and make you want to pull up a chair and stay a while. In the summer of 1914, Thomson made his way to Georgian Bay, Minadugumi and Waseagami Weequahic in Anishinaabemowin, invited by a patron who wanted to encourage his growth and continue capturing the feel of the North. Unlike other members of the Group of Seven, Thomson did not spend much time painting Georgian Bay, despite having grown up near the lake. In this picture, we find more of the Impressionist influence, but with a brighter, more saturated palette, and what would become a hallmark of his most well-known pieces: windswept, flagpole-esque trees. There's a lot of movement in this picture, caused by the flowing shapes of the trees and their branches. You can really feel the wind blowing past you. This feel of movement would strengthen into what are maybe the two most well-known pictures in Canadian art, the West Wind and the Jack Pine. Both of these paintings were made after he'd worked with Florence McGillivray, who taught him about Fauvist palette theories and composition techniques. In the West Wind, we find a flagpole tree clinging to the rocks on the shores of a lake in Algonquin Provincial Park as the wind whips up the water on the lake. The palette is more experimental, providing us a range of colors, from greens, blues, purples, and reds that are now taking up more of the canvas. One thing that I enjoy about Thomson's work is comparing the studies and the final pictures. Seeing how quickly and efficiently he captured the scene in his study, and how he hints at the final, fleshed-out version is always amazing to me. The Jack Pine, which, along with the West Wind, was one of the final completed works that Thomson made before his untimely death, we find another flagpole tree standing on the shore of a calm lake at morning as the sunlight filters through the sky. The palette has hints of Fauvism in the teals and turquoises of the sky, but the foreground retains a realism in the dark greens and brownish reds. The tree itself was located near Grand Lake in Algonquin Provincial Park and survived until the 1970s, when it died and was used as firewood by campers. The similarities between this piece and McGillivray's Afterglow are striking, and I encourage you to compare both pieces on your own. Comparing the study and the final work for this picture is more interesting than doing the same for the West Wind. The study for the Jack Pine has more movement in the sky, and the palette is a lot brighter than that of the final piece. I like how you can see the disconnect here, and how much Thomson worked to make the final piece more finished in its use of brushstrokes and palette choices. the swirling sky giving way to uniform horizontal strokes, and the brightness of the palette shifting to the sky and remaining more muted in the bottom and foreground. For my study this week, I chose this digital remastering of Islands Canoe Lake by Thomson for a few reasons. The first reason is that Canoe Lake was Thomson's muse. He spent most of his time in Algonquin Provincial Park on the lake, staying at the now ghost town of Mowat on the northwestern shore, near Little Wapameaw Island, the translation of which is unclear, but is claimed to be Anishinaabemowin for birds of sunshine and laughter, or blue birds of happiness. The second reason is that Canoe Lake is where Thomson drowned, under mysterious circumstances, and is therefore a crucial part of his legacy. The third reason is that it is a painting of Algonquin Park, a place that the Group of Seven used to present their vision of Canada as a pristine, uninhabited land, through a colonial gaze that erased the presence of Indigenous peoples. The park itself is named after the Algonquin First Nations, whose traditional territory straddles the Ottawa River, Kitchissippi, and extends into the provinces of Ontario and Quebec. Banned from the park that bears their nation's name, the Algonquins were excluded from what is now a Canadian, and more specifically an Ontarian park, and one that has been colonized in the group's landscape paintings, and therefore, this piece serves as a reminder for me of who is included in Canadian landscape paintings, and raises questions of is there an owner of the land? What does that ownership mean? And who is being included and excluded in these pictures? I've included an article by Matteo Similaro in the description box below if you're interested in learning more about changing views on the Group of Seven's work. The final reasons that I chose this piece as a study is that it will allow me to focus on the short, quick strokes that define the style of painting, and to attempt to expand my palette by maintaining the neon hues. And how did we do? All right, we now have our finished card here. So before we sleeve it up and put it into the deck, let's do our standard review and make sure that overall we've met our goals. So coming into this project, I had two goals. The first was to work on the short, quick brush strokes, and the second was to maintain the neon palette of the original. Now, I think I did very well with these short strokes, and I feel good about my ability to reproduce them in future. However, the palette section is where this piece is suffering the most. And a lot of that is just due to the fact that I obviously need to spend more time mixing colors. And I think a good way to do that is to just sit down and start doing more color studies of pieces. Where you would mix the colors and then paint them as squares into like a blank sheet of paper. And I think that'll help me improve that section a lot going forward. However, I am going to keep this card even though I've only met one of my goals and I'm not as happy with it as I have been with the other pieces. And the reason I'm going to keep it is because it's a good reminder for why this practice and these studies are so important to learning how to do things, because it forces you to work on things that maybe you're not as confident with, like mixing colors or short brush strokes. And it allows you the chance to get better at those things and to recognize where you still need to improve. So I'm going to keep it. I'm going to play it in the deck. But I know now that I'm going to have to spend a lot more time just sitting down doing some color studies and working on that part of my painting ability. All right, now that we've got our finished card, we can put some top coat on it and put it into the deck. And that means that I'm going to leave you with our final takeaway as always, which is to remember that the effort you put in is more important than the perfection you achieve. And that's to say that the more you try, the better you'll get. You just have to try. And I think this episode was a really good example of how putting in work can lead to you improving even if you don't meet your goals, because it reveals to you what you still need to learn and what you can work on more going forwards. I want to thank you for joining me as always. I had a lot of fun learning about more of Tom Thomson's work than I already knew, and I hope that you enjoyed it as well and learned something new. I hope that you join me again in 2 weeks' time when we'll take a look at yet another Canadian artist for yet another study. Until then, happy painting and peace.